In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening, ladies. Good to have everyone with us this evening. And good to have Bertina Smelser and Colleen with us this evening. And I'm Dana. If you don't know me, you probably do. You're probably familiar with all of us. I know Bertina's been on a few times that I've seen, and Colleen's on fairly regularly. So we want to welcome you to tonight's program. We're going to be talking about global evangelism in the church and kind of delving into what is the role of the woman in global evangelism, or does she have a role? You know, we tend to think of the men as being involved in work, but is there a place for women? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Bertina, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and the work that you and your husband have done overseas?
Okay. Well, my husband and I got to know each other when we were in college. We had met before, but when we were starting to get a little more serious one time, he said, "There's something I'd like to talk to you about." And I'm from the South. I'm from Alabama originally. And he said, "I just wanted to let you know I'm planning to try to preach the gospel in places where there's not that many churches, maybe overseas or maybe in other parts of the U.S. And I just wanted you to know that." And I said, "That sounds good." He said, "It does?" I said, "It does." So that just helped us get closer. So I knew that in advance, but it wasn't until in the 1990s that we went after the Berlin Wall fell. That was an opportunity where a lot of people in Eastern European countries hadn't really heard the word very much. There was a lot of suppression going on, and it wasn't that common for people to know a lot about the Bible, actually. Right. So he went on an exploratory trip with some people and decided that we would move our family there, and we had 2 children at the time.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
What ages were your children when you moved there?
At that time, the first time we went 2 years, but it was not sequential. So for the first year that we went, our daughter was about, our son was 1.5 and our daughter was around 5 or 6.
Okay, really young, right, okay. And Colleen, what's your experience with working with churches?
Well, I have not been out of the country, so I'm going to sit here and enjoy hearing what all of you have to say. I have kind of interviewed informally various people, so I do have some stories from people who have, women who have gone abroad and taught the gospel. So I can't say that I've got the experience that you or Bertina have, and I can't wait to hear it.
But you do a lot of teaching, right?
I do. Yes, I do.
And even, I mean, in the States, in local, Wow.
Yes, and I have also supported foreign work.
Okay.
Just personally done that, especially in India. But I never went there.
Right.
Provided support and things that I could give other than going. It wasn't a good time for women to go at the time, so I never went.
Okay, well, we're going to kind of talk about that in a little bit, about opportunities and et cetera, et cetera. So my husband and I loved your story about your husband warned you before you got married. So did mine. And he wanted to move to Mexico. And I didn't even know hola at that time. I'm certainly not fluent today, but I can muddle through a little bit. But we took a trip to Mexico and to visit. And it was actually before we got married. We took a bus. Now I'm telling how old I was because it was safe enough to, well, it was kind of safe enough. But we took a bus and drove for, I forget how many hours upon hours, down into Morelia, which is midway down in the Mexican country. Probably, I think maybe 600 miles, or I forget. It was a long ways. And stayed with a family there. And I guess we were there about a week. It was a great experience, but we came home and I said, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And I thought about it, but I finally, I said, oh, we need to break off our engagement because I just can't do this. Because that was that was his plan. And he chose me over that, which, he was good with that. That was fine. And he preached for a Spanish congregation. So it was in Spanish. And as our kids came along, I would take them on Sunday mornings to a Anglo congregation up the road, and we would worship with them. So they had Bible classes and yada, yada. This went on for several years. And after about 10 years, well, it was a little more than that. But anyway, he wanted to move to the islands in the Caribbean. And we made a trip. We went and looked at it. Long story short, we ended up moving there, and I always said he deceived me because he took me out of the country anyway. But we lived in the islands in the West Indies for about 8.5 years, and then our children were between, I think, 8 and 12, or 7 and 12 when we moved there. So they kind of grew up in their adolescence and then went off to college. And then later, Tala and I moved back to the States, and then later he and I moved to Puerto Rico for about 4.5 years. So I guess we were gone around 13 years total. So that's where we were. We were in the islands, the West Indies, in the 90s. Most of the 90s. And then he and I did a lot of work in what was called the Down Islands, that chain of islands that goes from Puerto Rico down to South America. And so we did a lot of vacation Bible schools and work there. And then we've been into some of the other countries. He's been in all but, I think, Brazil. I've been to some of them, but not that many. But anyway, so that's what we want to talk about tonight, is the work in the church, what the role of the woman is, and particularly in work outside the country. And the first thing I want to talk about is, we all are familiar with the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 19 and 20, where Jesus said to his disciples to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And we could say, well, that was to the apostles. And I've heard people say, well, that was only to the apostles. What do you think about that? So you're shaking your head, Colleen. No. Do we have other scriptures that would show us that's not just for the apostles?
Well, except for a few narrow examples, I'm going to say that, the apostles taught people faithfully, and then those people were supposed to commit their teaching to others, and it was supposed to be passed down. So unless there's some real big reason that you can't do what the apostles did, like, miracles or be inspired by the Holy Spirit, I'm going to say that just about everything that they were commanded to do, we're commanded to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Bertina, did you have a scripture that you wanted to share with us?
Yes, I did.
Bible.
Yeah, I was just trying to spot it because I was talking so much I wasn't looking down. But I really like what Paul says in Romans. I believe it's Romans 15, 20 to 21. And I think this is sort of what my husband kind of likes to think about. It says, Paul saying, and I make it my ambition to preach the gospel, not where Christ has already been named, lest I build on someone else's foundation. But those who have never been told of him will see, and those who have never heard will understand. So Paul wanted to go to just even more places to give more people the opportunity.
Yeah,
So
I like that. I didn't think about that one.
That's good.
A very good one. Well, I thought about Acts chapter 8, and if you're familiar, well, I know you're familiar with this. When you remember, there was the persecution of the church, and Saul, had wreaked havoc in the churches. And in verse 1, it says, "And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles." So who was scattered? As you said, Colleen, the members, the church was scattered. And if we skip down to verse 4, "And those who were scattered went about preaching the word everywhere." And if you went on down to verse 12, it gives us an example of Philip in between there. And it says, "And when they had believed, the people that he had taught, the good news about the kingdom of God and the name of Jesus Christ, they were baptized, both men and women." So we see that the members had this influence, and they went out and did the teaching. And I specifically like the fact that it says everybody went except the apostles at that time. So we certainly have examples. And I think, as you say, Colleen, we'd have a lot of examples that would talk about how we're to do. I mean, that's what Paul commanded us, to follow him as he follows Christ. Yeah. So I think we can all see the importance of that. So, well, we can see that we have, maybe we would say, authority or permission for us all to go. I think it's interesting. It doesn't say that only the men taught. It just says they all went and spread the word. And we know there are some limitations to what we as women can do in the public worship of the church, but I can go teach, and I need to be about doing that every day. When we look at some of these verses, like the Great Commission in Matthew 28, like Mark 16:15, "Go into the world and preach the gospel to all creation." Do you think that's a mandate for us to go into the world, or does that matter? Do I personally have a responsibility to make certain the gospel is spread I guess that's what I'm asking, everywhere I can go? What do you think?
Are we all supposed to move?
Pardon me?
Are you asking, should we all move?
I'm not asking if we should all move. I said, do I have a responsibility to spread the gospel wherever I'm at?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, and because I've heard people say, "No, I don't have that. I don't have that. I'm a woman and I don't have that responsibility." And now I do not believe we're all supposed to move. We'll talk about that. I do not believe that. I do not believe that. Okay.
Dana, I don't know if you're going to go back to this, but you brought up women going abroad. Mm-hmm. And I can think of a couple of examples off the top of my head where preachers are in other countries and they're like, please send women. We need women. Please come.
We are going to talk about that because I think my experience and probably Bertina's experience, that can be, there's pros and cons, but I think, I think that's huge, very huge. And so we'll come back to that because I think that's a very, very good point that we need to talk about. So I want to ask this question, and you've kind of talked a little bit about it, Bertina, but why would we go to another country to teach? Why would a Christian, and as women, why would we feel the need to go to another country to teach or to work with our husbands in global evangelism?
Well, I think for one reason, just sometimes the door is opened for us and we can walk through the door. That door is not necessarily opened to everyone, but if the door is open to us and we have the opportunity and the ability to move and we're willing to, I believe it's great to do. Sometimes it's out of necessity, though, like like you mentioned in the first century. One of my favorite examples is Priscilla, because we had to move around a lot, and she's just always there. She's even mentioned in one of the Corinthian letters as Paul's fellow worker. And so, and she and her husband helped teach Apollos together. But I don't know that they were moving to evangelize, but they were moving and therefore they evangelized.
Yeah. So well, and they were forced to move.
Exactly.
They were pushed out. Yes.
While they were at it, of course, they were teaching.
Right. Mm-hmm. So can we do that? I mean, do we ever have those kinds of things happen domestically in our country, that you move? So I moved and left my home congregation, so I don't have to go teach where I moved to. Colleen?
Well, I know of a great example. I'm from a part of the country where there's really a dearth of actual Bible teaching. I grew up in a lot of error and denomination, and so I feel like I was one of those people completely in the dark. I mean, of course, I knew biblical principles. I knew about God. I knew about the Holy Spirit and Jesus, but it was a lot of error. I pretty much had to wipe the slate clean. I had never really studied the Bible. Well, so this is the area where I grew up, and that is pretty much the way it is there. Dearth of churches. Well, in we used to go back home, and there was this church. These people that were from Alabama the dad had gotten a job at a factory. He was an engineer or something, and he had been moved up there. And so they just started a church. And actually, it did quite well for a while, but then I think a lot of people lost their jobs and people just scattered. Right. But that's a great example. They took this job, and I don't know that they were going, if they would have just chosen to go there, but they did. And it was great. We went, and there was the New Testament church.
Yeah. See, and I think that's something that kind of talks about something we discussed just a moment ago. Do we all have to move? Well, no. Is global evangelism important? Is it important that people go to other countries to teach and preach? Absolutely. And praise God that there are people who have the ability, feel the calling to go. But what should we all go and forget that there's just as much work to be done here at home? And I think both are equally and vitally important. And Colleen, you're a perfectly good example of the importance of that. When we went, and I know, Bertina, when y'all went shortly after the Berlin Wall fell, you went because you saw a need. There was a need. That's why we went. And we went, the long story short, the reason my husband was the one who needed to go to the Caribbean was because it was bilingual. He was bilingual. And when we got to the island we were on, there were very few people who spoke Spanish, so that didn't really apply. But that gave us the opportunity to then jump to the other islands that were Spanish speaking and do work. And so we went because of the need, and because of his desire. It was not my desire, I'm just saying, but it was the need that we both felt. Is that everybody else's calling? And I believe God makes opportunities come your way. And there are some people that I don't think necessarily need to go to a foreign country because it is different and it is hard. And And I don't know about you, Bertina, but if I had known what we were going to face, oh, I'd have never gone. I always say it's great we don't know we can't see the future, because we wouldn't do a lot of things. But there are challenges anywhere, even here at home. I'm sure this family that you're talking about that moved from Alabama to where you were living had challenges starting a church. I know we've started a lot of churches, and that's a very difficult work. I'm sure it was a small work. So you saw the challenges of working in a small group.
And here's a factor that I think people don't really think about this, because I almost never hear anyone talk about, when they talk about people with talents and abilities and skills that can be used in the church, almost never does anybody mention the people that are like really good at making money.
This is
They
true.
got great jobs. They're flush with cash and they're generous. Why would you send them to a third world country? I mean, it's okay if that's how it works out, but it's really better that they probably stay here and generate money, so people like you, Bertina, and like you, Dana, can go and teach people in other countries. You can not be encumbered by trying to find a job.
Yeah.
You can spend all your time and there's somebody else working and sending you a check.
Oh, I can, boy, I could fill pages and pages of those brethren. You probably could too, Bertina.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've always been thankful that there were people back home that were willing and able to support us. And we didn't have to worry about that. And we lived in a place in the Czech Republic, and it was Czechoslovakia. When we first moved there, and when we went back, it was split in a good way, but it was different. But those people didn't have a lot in communism. They had very little. They didn't own much, and we didn't. We were well supplied, but we also didn't need to flood money. We didn't need to look as totally different than them. So we really tried to blend in and just, live just like they did. But if somebody is very affluent and goes there and it's just interesting how it is in different countries. But in America is a very affluent country. Even if a particular person doesn't feel they are.
They are.
To other places.
Yeah.
So it is a very different world. But I actually did have a good experience, though. I wanted to go, and I wouldn't mind going back again. So I guess everybody just has their thing.
Yeah. Well, we went back. We moved back later.
You were there for a long time.
I didn't want to go there either, just saying. but we wouldn't have gone if I wasn't willing to go.
Of course.
We wouldn't have stayed for the many, many years that we stayed if I wasn't willing to do that.
Absolutely. Right.
It's not something I would have chosen.
Exactly.
But as I say to women all the time who would say, oh, I haven't sacrificed. I haven't moved out of the country. I haven't made those sacrifices. Well, God didn't call you to live my life, and he didn't call me to live your life. And I think, as you just mentioned, Colleen, about there are people who can stay here and work and help support. If we didn't have brethren like that supporting churches that could support us, or individuals helping to support, I have 3 children, and all of them send money to foreign preachers or preachers in foreign works. And they do that because they know personally the sacrifices. And they're in all different parts of the world that they send their money to. They all have very good jobs and are able to do that and feel that need. And that helps those brethren then further the gospel. So I think that's important. You bring up a really good point, Bertina, about when we do go, whether it's, and I want to just throw this out, whether it's that I go for 2 weeks to help with a vacation Bible school, or whether I go to live for a year or 2 years or 3 months or 13 or 14 years like we did. How important is it that I strive to fit in? What do you think?
I think it's very important. I think it shouldn't be our job. It is our job to help spread the gospel and to teach people about God. It is not our job to Americanize the world and to Americanize the churches. There can be things that look very different just in carrying out the Bible commands. We don't need to have them have 3 songs and a prayer and stand for the invitation and things like that. It's better to let things happen organically. And sometimes we were starting a church from scratch. But after we'd even been there for a little bit, just things that we had already been doing a certain way became what they were used to. And we shouldn't be arrogant to say, oh, let's do it this way now. A couple of times we thought about that, and it was like, oh, we don't need to act like we're in charge because we're American. So we do need to just be careful about where there's an expression called the ugly American. When Americans travel abroad, at least used to, and maybe it's still the case, just kind of being obnoxious, wanting things to be.
I think it's, I don't know that I've heard ugly American. I've heard arrogant American.
Mhm.
That's, and that because we often think we're the smart ones, we're the intelligent ones, and we know how it's supposed to be done. And, Colleen, you're in the business world. That doesn't work even there, does it? When one comes in as they know everything. You can probably speak to that.
Yeah, and one of the somebody's told me somewhere along the way that one of the things, the 3 songs of prayer and all that stuff, that's not a huge deal. That's not a cultural thing, but I've heard of people who go to some countries where time it's just not like the way we think.
You're talking about where we lived all those years.
Yes. Right. And I could see that could just drive you nuts.
Oh, yes.
But you have to really hold back because, well, there's no reason that you can't, that you have to be there right at a certain time. I can see really good reasons, but if that's their way and that's the way they look at it. We didn't look at that. In this country, we didn't start doing that probably till trains came along. Right. And you needed schedules. They didn't really. It was just farming and, whatever. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. Right. So we have to, that would be a difficult one. That would be hard.
Yeah, it is very hard. It's very hard. I don't know if it was that way in Europe, but it probably was.
It was not that way in Europe because it was very, people were coming on subways and things like that.
Okay.
What I like to think about is what would have been like in the first century. Yeah. They didn't have the same kind of watches and clocks. And when it talks about waiting for people to get there for the Lord's Supper, I really think if we were transported back to the first century, we would be, surprised. And so we are used to what we're used to. Yeah. And the time wasn't an issue, but I have heard of other places where.
Well, the joke was where we lived is, that we lived there for 4.5 years and lived there for 8.5 years and waited for 4. And that was very true. And I think that's true in a lot. But you get south of the border and anywhere south of the border, that's true. I have assumed it was that way everywhere, but I guess maybe not. So, Colleen, what do you think about would be the importance of us fitting in to some degree financially in our appearance? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. I have, this is just what I've gotten from people that have gone overseas. And even maybe not exactly what you're asking, but one thing is, like, really, in some of these countries, the people to us, they look like they're just in poverty, and you want to give them money, you want to send things to them. But the people that go over there and preach say, no, don't do that. That's their culture. That's the way it is. Now, if somebody's starving, that's a different story. But just because they wear the same clothes every day, and just because their house is not great, we need to hold back on trying to, like Bertina was saying, Americanizing people. That's it. We should go where they are and start preaching where they are mentally.
Yes.
And help if there's some, a famine, things like that. I've helped with things in the congregation.
Well, and I think the danger and the disservice that we do, because we've had brethren that would come and they came with a roll of money and they wanted to give and they wanted to give and they wanted to give. And I understand that, but the people had what they had to have. And when that money goes away, what do they now want? They want what they can't have. And we've taken that contentment away from them. And that's a danger, I think. And one of the things we saw is we needed to be careful that we lived on their level. Do you know what I'm saying? I didn't need, I think that's just as true here as a preacher, is we don't need to strive to live higher than everybody else. I mean, if we came in and lived in Appalachia, deep Appalachia, where people just had very, 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 very modest means, and we went in and built the finest home in the town and lived there, which might be fine if I lived in Dallas, that same home. But if I live on a totally different level than those people, how much influence am I going to have with them? And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be careful about. I want to kind of transition here and just talk about, what do you think some of the gains are, the advantages of, or maybe I should ask it this way. Bertina, what did you gain from going and evangelizing in a foreign country?
Well, one of the things I gained was just seeing people are people everywhere. We all have the same struggles. We all have, we have families, we have difficulties, we have joy, we have all kinds of things, and people are the same everywhere. And people always have been the same too. Sin and temptation are the same. There's more technology now than there used to be in ancient times. But in other parts of the world, you just see, oh, this is a family. This is how they do things. Their house might look different, but everybody, God loves everybody. We are all the same. Our souls are all the same. And it just made me feel very united and one with the world to be in a foreign country. When we went back to visit, we did this more than one time. They had something kind of like the lectures. They called it the lectures. How in Florida in Florida College, they have lectures. Well, they would get a school and they would reserve it. And one of the times there was people from like 7 different countries, I think. Countries there are more the size of states.
Yeah.
So it was easy.
Right.
There were people from Russia and Moldova and all these places in Eastern Europe. And I just cried as we sang, and we put some songs and lyrics in all the languages, and we sang it. It was a very simple phrase, but it just brought tears to my eyes to see all the languages flowing up to God, and He understands all of it because He's the author of it all. And so it just made me feel one with the world, really, and a part of God's big family.
Yeah, I like the way you word that, one with the world. That's very, very good. You know, I think one of the things, and you're kind of alluding to that. One of the things I got was, in both places that we lived, was to get an appreciation for another culture.
Yes.
I like my culture better, but that's because that's what I'm raised with. And I think it's fascinating. And we met so many people when we lived in the islands who were from other places who had come there to get work, because it was more prosperous than, though those were not very prosperous in comparison to where we live. It was more prosperous than from where they came. And then we were able to go to where they came from and to see how they had been raised in literally grass huts and et cetera, et cetera. And to them, moving to the island where we had lived was like, you know, the streets were paved with gold. And I'm going, oh, no, they're not. You know? But to them it was. But you know what I always found is we all wanted to go home. I would love to go back and live where I came from. And I that was a thing that always struck me. And you see that with people in the States who, and I know that's not true always, but home is where our family is, where our roots are, and where our traditions are, where our culture is. And I always thought that was something I learned. We are truly all alike.
Mhm.
We all get homesick. We all miss our family. And I think one of the other big things, and you probably saw that, Bertina, is the hunger for the gospel
Mhm.
that we seem to lack here.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of our affluence so much. But that was something that I saw in living in a foreign country. So, Colleen, you said you've talked to other people. Have any of them expressed anything in particular about what they gained from living somewhere else?
Mostly I asked about their conditions, the conditions they lived in. So, I mean, it's obvious. You're taking the word of God. The best job and the best message. Oh, salvation, good news, gospel. I mean, I think that's a given. I talked to one woman who lived in a country in Africa. She said that she she was pretty much second-class citizen. They had a bank account, but she could not draw money out of it. They had to have an account here in the States for her, just in case something happened to her husband, so that she could get some money.
Because she was a woman, is that what you're saying?
This was a woman, because she was a woman.
That's where I'm going. So this was not for him. This was because because she was a woman. Okay, wow.
Yes, and somebody who recently went to another country in Africa, she told me, she was a young unmarried woman. She said, I would never go back there without my husband, a husband or my dad, because you are just nothing.
Yeah.
The women have to sit on the floor to eat.
Wow.
And the men sit in the chairs. So we don't really think about that. And they're not going to talk about that. They're not going to advertise that. Yeah. But so we understand that it is very different. And
every culture you go to is very, very different. It has its things. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very. That's a good point. Yeah. So then the other thing I want us to think about, so there are advantages when you learn about things. So then you're talking about something she feared she lost by moving to another country. So what are some things you could share that you lost, Bertina?
Well, there's the obvious
losses.
Of course, there's always sacrifice involved when you do something different. And the obvious one would be being far from our family and our friends from before and our culture. I agree with Colleen that it's not good to just pump money into places. But something that people did for us when we were overseas is they would bring, and we had 3 children the second time we went. But they would even just bring small food items and things that we couldn't usually get. But, it's fine. We had the food that they had. For the most part, I just tried to think, well, they have kids here and this is what they do. So we did it. But we still liked our, certain kind of cereal or things that were fun. So that was encouraging to us that people brought us the things that we missed. One time this is a funny story. We had to go out of the country ever so often to get our passport stamped, and then we could go back. We couldn't just stay there all the time. We had to go every 3 months or something. And we went into Poland. We got to travel. That was something that was fun. We got to travel several countries. But we went into this more like Western style grocery store, which is not what we usually got to go to. We got a bunch of cereals and things. Our family likes to eat cereal and stuff. And our little toddler, our young boy at the time, he said, "Daddy, did you get a job?" This whole big grocery store cart full of stuff. But we were getting stuff that we couldn't usually get. And we usually were just buying a little bit of stuff at the time. And we had to walk because we didn't have a car and stuff. So we had rented a car for this trip. But, just things like that were a treat. So it was more simple things. But one disadvantage that I wouldn't have thought to know about is we don't realize sometimes the prejudice that people have towards other people. And we did have a little bit of that because the Czechs are looked down upon by some of the more affluent countries around them. And some of the other ones that used to be communist countries were looked down upon by some of the more affluent countries. And so we rented a car that was a Czech car. It was called a Skoda. And we went to some places like Switzerland and other parts of Germany and things like that. And we were at a hotel one night, and some mean person slit a bunch of tires in the parking lot, and they did 2 tires on most, but on our Czech car, they did all 4, something like
Wow.
that. They thought we were Czechs, and people would just be honking their horns at us and stuff because they thought we were Czech. But what's so funny is other times people knew we were Americans, and they were fawning over us and was like, "Oh, let us, do this." And we didn't want any special treatment. We just wanted to be people.
Right.
It's kind of interesting to see the prejudice either way that we can have, and we're all just people. We need to remember that ourselves too. That treat everybody the same.
Yeah. Well, living in the islands where we lived, there was only at the time we lived there, only about 3% white, and the rest were Black West Indians. And it gave me a much deeper and richer understanding and appreciation. Appreciation is probably not the word, but comprehension of what true prejudice is. And it was, I guess you could say, reverse prejudice, and it was. But I've always hated prejudice, but I abhor it now. Because, like you say, we're all God's people, and we're all people, and it doesn't matter what color our skin is. It doesn't matter what language we speak. And that is certainly something that I count that as a gain in understanding that. And you never are, you never really fit in. You're always, and that doesn't mean that there aren't good people there who treat you nice and et cetera, but it's only to a level, and except for among the brethren. But the many years that we were there, and the close friends we had, even in the community and so on and so forth, I think that was one of the things that was a loss. The family connections that we had. We were there so long that your kids grow up without cousins, so they're not close to their cousins today. And I regret there's a lot of those kinds of things. And yet my children have such an appreciation and love for many other people and other cultures. I'd like to read really quickly, if you just bear with me a second. Joanne Beckley had been invited to be in this program, and they lived in Africa. I don't remember if it was South Africa, but in Africa for over 40 years, in Southern Africa, she says. And I just want to read you some things she shared that talk about this thing. I won't read the whole thing, but she said, she and her husband were blessed to share the gospel for nearly 40 years in a foreign land, Southern Africa. Her husband saw a great need and chose to respond. And I think that's the thing. This has to be your choice. If you go and it's not your choice, that's not going to be a good thing. Not only did we increase our own faith through tough times, but we shared in the great joy of those who found their Lord and rejected their unreliable ancestors they worshiped. In making this choice, we lost the closeness of being with family and no longer fitting in as Americans on our return. They spent 40 years, and I know how hard it was I froze to death for the first 3 years we were back in the States, because you get acclimated to no air conditioning and 90 plus degrees with 100% humidity. And we froze to death for years. But it is hard to transition. And I can't imagine after living that long out of the country. She said, it's interesting to see what happens when a visiting preacher comes to Africa and returns home some 2 weeks later. those taught often revert to what they've always done, talking about the brethren there in Africa. To limit this very human reaction, a preacher or teacher needs to stick around to help them in their spiritual growth. This is true whether back home or in a foreign land. And I love that she makes that point. One very important advantage of long-term effort is they can see from our example how to actually live for Christ in the home and elsewhere. And I just wanted to share that last part because I want to transition into the fact that is it different in living in a place versus going and working in a place for a couple of weeks? What do y'all think? You're shaking your head, Bertina.
I do think it's different. I think that it's not wrong and it is good to go shorter term, but I believe staying longer is better because you can stay, but it's not for everybody, but it's
no.
People do. And you can, like I was saying earlier, the older women can teach the younger women anywhere. We can do it here or there. And partly you're doing it by your manner of life.
Right.
So I think there are advantages to staying longer, but of course not everybody can do that. And I think it's true in this country too. One thing we've done is to help start churches, and that's what we're doing here in Harrisburg. It's just a small group. But sometimes we meet people who don't know what a Christian family is like. And they'll say, wow, to Scott, they say, this is amazing to just have. And for me, I'm just making a meal for them, but they're like, they never had that.
Right.
So it can be that way anywhere you are. So whether here or abroad, because we're living here.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think the advantages would be, Colleen, in staying? And I think, as she says, anywhere, if so apply it to what you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I became a Christian, I was in my early 20s. I had never studied the Bible, had never heard of the church, anything like that. It was like I was on another planet. And I studied for about 6 months and I became a Christian. And right for the next about 3 years on a weekly basis, I met with the guy that was preaching there and we studied, and it was the best thing. And I have tried since to get people to do that. And it's rare for a new Christian to want to study the Bible. But I think that is key.
Oh, I do too.
Because for one thing, if you come out of the world and you've never studied the Bible before, you've got all these questions and they're kind of personal. And you don't want to, in front of a whole class, ask, well, is it okay if I did this or that? It's personal stuff. You don't, and you feel like all these people, they're way ahead of you. They know all the answers, which may not be true. But this is a way for you to have somebody you trust and then ask. And if they're really good, they'll say, well, here's what I know about that. Turn here, read that. Turn here, read that. And if people can be, I don't know if there's something that we that are Christians can do to help new Christians say yes when they're asked to study. I would say we need to do that.
I think what always is true is I always say, and no, I'm sure I read this somewhere, but you can say anything to anybody if they know that you love them. Well, it's hard for me to build that kind of a relationship in 2 weeks. But over time, I can build that relationship and that bond and that trust, and that takes time. And I think that's probably the biggest advantage to going and planting yourself somewhere and working, whether it's a local work here or whether it's in a foreign country, but especially in a foreign country, they already have their guard up, their shield up, and so we need to be careful about that, and I think that's an advantage that we can overcome by going and living and staying there with them. So that brings up the question, well, then is it effective at all if I just go for 2 weeks? We used to go to islands every summer and vacation Bible schools, and we would be there a week or 2 weeks. Does that have any advantage? And we would have people from the States come and meet us and go with us. Was that a waste of time?
Absolutely not.
No. I mean, we have, revivals or gospel meetings, series of lessons, and a preacher comes and preaches once a night for a week or 4 or 5 days. Is that a waste of time? No. And was it you, Colleen, that talked about people have said, oh, they needed women to come. So this is where I want to hit on that. Is there a place for women to go and work in these places? If you can move there, we've just talked about how wonderful that would be. But that is not, everybody get this, not for everybody. It's not possible for everybody. But what if you've got a week? You could go take a week of your vacation time and go. What do you think were there opportunities for that kind of thing where you lived, Bertina?
Yes, there were. The lectureship that I mentioned, they have an event, kind of like we would have a gospel meeting, but it was almost like camp for whole families. And we would go, and there would be women's classes, children's classes, things for everybody, things like that. But one thing that's better now, as far as than it was in the 90s when you and I were both overseas, is even now, sometimes if you do go for a little bit, you can keep a relationship going a little bit because we have so much good ways of communicating.
Yes.
Like if I meet somebody somewhere else now, we can stay in touch. Oh, let's FaceTime or, WhatsApp or whatever it is, ways that you can do it.
We didn't even have a computer back then.
Yeah.
They were just coming out. Yeah.
We were relying on letters. I mean, the people I stayed in touch with, a young mom and I, we wrote letters all the time to each other. And then in recent years, we exchanged them because now we each have a diary of our own lives. But we wrote letters. But I mean, and you could do that, but we can stay in touch. If we go for a short time, we can still stay in touch with some of those people.
Right.
So there's good things that can still happen for short times.
Yeah.
Here's something to think about. I know in one country where the congregation I worship with is very close with the guy that preaches there. And one thing they need is teaching materials, like for kids. And see, our stuff, we got like great stuff. We've got really good, but everybody in the picture is white and it's in English.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's no end to all the translating to all those different little languages. Yeah. So, if you've got that skill, you can really be valuable.
Well, and, we've had so many people say over the years, well, can we send material here or there? That is getting to be almost impossible because of the cost. But everybody's got a cell phone down there. They even have smartphones, well, at least where we were at, where people didn't even have a phone when we went down there, not even a landline. They've all got something now. And there are so many ways of communicating. But I just want to say there are places and there are serious needs for women to come, to go with their husbands, or even to just go with other groups. Many of the places that we have been and worked in, you may be, if you are able to go, you may be the only woman Christian they have ever seen, other than the small little group that they meet with. And they may never see another Christian woman. They see the men, because the men will come, the gospel preachers will come down there, but the wives don't go, or women don't go. And that is something that is, I encourage you, if you have opportunity, make contact with someone who lives in some of these places. Now, we might ask a question, well, is it safe to do that? Well, that depends on where you're going. I can share with you some islands that you could go to that would be safe, and I can share some islands with you don't want to go if you're by yourself. And it is becoming more and more difficult to travel by yourself. There are places that groups of women could go. They are hungry for that kind of thing. And so there are lots of opportunities. And if you can't go, you can help send someone else. You can help, like Colleen was just talking about, you can help send money. You can help send supplies and teaching materials and et cetera, that there's always a need for, such a need for. You know, Isla had given us some questions, and one of the things she said, what would be an Amazon wish list if you live in the foreign country? Well, we didn't have Amazon back when we lived there. And then when we did get Amazon, when we were in Puerto Rico, it wasn't free shipping. And so it really didn't do good. And you talked about y'all always wanted foods, certain foods. Ours was Wolf brand chili. That's a Texas chili. And that's where I'm from. And we had brethren who would bring us Wolf brand chili in their luggage. Now you couldn't do that because it's too expensive, and it's, you know, it's food. But there, if you know people who live in these foreign places, or your congregation is supporting people, they have things they would love to have that they don't have opportunity to. So what about, and Bertina, you can address this, and Colleen, you may be familiar with this. You said y'all send help to people. So what about just a small gift? You know, maybe you can't support someone over a long period of time, but you've got an extra $25. Is that helpful to send to someone in a foreign country working?
I mean, I think it is. It depends on the circumstance. I mean, there may be people who just have all the support they can handle. But most of the time, from our experience, sometimes your support you can lose support from a place. Like maybe a church's circumstance has changed and they are having to drop some support or things like that. So I think it's normally a very helpful thing. People have done nice things for us all through the years, and we have lots of thank yous for people that have done things like that for us. So we've had individuals to support us different times. We had individuals supporting us here in Harrisburg because this is not a foreign country, but we started a new congregation. There wasn't a sound
mission field.
It is. It is. But there are individuals who have supported us. The church is starting to be able to support us partially now, but it's a partial support situation.
Right.
So I think a small gift is great. Yeah.
And I would agree. We never had enough support. It was always a struggle. Like you said, just about the time you'd get, okay, we finally got, then another congregation had some circumstance, and yeah. So, Colleen, what has been your experience with helping people?
I think they're always appreciative, and the occasions when it kind of went sour, I would say would be rare, but you do need to be careful about sending.
And I'm more addressing sending support to preachers from here who have gone to work somewhere. Mm-hmm. Because I agree with you. If you're just sending money to preachers from that country, you do have to be careful. And that's not really particularly what I was addressing, because that's a whole nother subject. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. That is a different topic, and it has happened that kind of messes up people's motives.
It does.
It can suddenly become a way to get rich, or because the same thing as you said, you want to help people out of poverty, but suddenly they're having riches that to us doesn't seem like much, but it can really mess up people's motives and start to do things for money or situations I've heard of.
We never want to be. We never want to do that. Yeah. So, ladies, I think we're about wind this up. Was there any other thing you wanted to touch on that you feel you needed to be said about this subject?
Dana, I think you ran us through that completely. I think that was a thorough look at that topic.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much that could be said. I encourage anyone who has the desire to doing something like this to get together with somebody else who's been there and done it. My husband's health is in such a situation we can't live out of the country. In fact, we ended up moving from Puerto Rico back to the States because of some very severe health issues he had. And he continued for many years to travel, and now he's maybe going to get to start doing a little bit again, but he'll never, I mean, we're at the age, he'll never be able to do that. But we were blessed to do that. And we were blessed to have other brothers and sisters in Christ do that through us by sharing with us and supporting us and praying for us. Oh, we can pray for people who do this. It is not for everyone. God has not called all of us to do this. But I encourage you to become involved one way or another, whether in a supportive role or if you can go. If you can only go for a week, oh, there are so many places in this hemisphere. You don't even have to go to Europe or, you know, these scary, dangerous countries. There are safe countries. There are safe islands. There are safe countries that would love to have you come and work with them. And so anyway, all right, with that said, we are going to say good night. I thank you so much for joining us. And it was so good to have Bertina to share her experience with us. And Colleen, it's always good to have you. So with that, we're going to say good night, and we'll see you next time. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye.